I want to read a bit from this memoir. It was a very difficult book to write, took many, many years of adding and amending, and it has to do with friendships over 30 years, largely in Greece and Turkey, and it has to do with the passage of time and the effort to sort of hold these things in place. If I read just the opening page, you'll get a sense of the 30-year history of the book. Starts in 1980, ends in 2009, 29 years. I'm starting right here in 1996, so I'm sort of halfway through the story, and I'm coming back to the stone hut I lived in when I was a kid, which happened to be next door to the villa of one of the greatest living writers of English prose, a man named Patrick Fermor. Not so well known in America, but an astonishing writer. So I'm in this stone hut next to this guy's villa, and I'm meeting people like Bruce Chatwin and Stephen Spender and all these folks who are passing through while I'm growing my vegetables, etc. And when I left Greece, my marriage broke up and I thought I'd never get back. And this is the moment when I came back and I decided, damn it, there's a story to tell here. What did you expect? The rain had stopped. I walked south of the village and found the path down from the road. It curved along a lone stone wall among the dripping olive trees. And then I saw the little house where we had lived, the gate. You have to understand, I thought I would never see these things again, and it crushed me, as if a realm of happiness were inaccessible forever. 16 years had passed since I'd last been in the village, and in that time, I'd lost my footing in the world. Losing the village, losing Greece was only part of that. I could see something of the past, nothing of the future, another 14 years in which I would try to get this down. And now I stood on the bluff above the rocks at Kalamitsi, my clothes wet from the rain, the winter sea green-blue and foaming on volcanic rocks below, the cypress tree, the tangled sage and thorns on the cliff edge were no bar to my coming back. What did you expect? I thought this was a story I could write. Back in Greece after so much distance and time and space, and people I had known when I was young were still alive. The village was alive, still going on, and it was enough to know I had not lost them, not entirely. And it was not an ending any more than the village was mine to lose. It was just another circling back, another attempt to pick up the broken thread of things and follow where it led. Now I would be coming back and would write in earnest about my friends, trying to bring them all into the circle and tell the story as I saw it, and tell it again until I got it right. But the story was still unfolding. It has taken a long time to get this down, and everything has changed as I have written, revising a book, revising a life. Now, as I worked on the book, I showed it to a wonderful poet named A.E. Stallings, who lives in Greece, has been there for a decade now. And she said, well, it's pretty good, but you're a poet. Put some poems in the book. And so one of the things that happens in this prose narrative is that every now and then the emotional bits of the story are conveyed in verse. And this is just one, I'm going to give you one example of a poem in the book, and then I'm going to read a scene about Paddy Lee Fermor from the end of the book. And leave it at that. This poem is called Agnostos Topos, and the title is explained in the poem. We had walked a whole day on high ridges, somewhere between the heat-struck sea and peaks, each breath a desert in a traveler's lungs, salt-stung, dusty, like summer's rasping grass and the roughness of stone. Biblical thorns penned us, while the stunted ilex trees shadowed the path. It seemed from these dour fields we could not emerge on anything like a road. A landscape no one had commodified or fenced. If there were gardens here, the poverty of soil defeated them. If there were homes beyond some goatherd's hut, the gravity of ages pulled them down. No sound but cicadas like high-pitched drills ringing till red sunlight hissed into the sea. And that was when, our shins scratched and throats parched, we stumbled into a village on the shore where people, stupefied by days upon days that were the same, told us what to call this place. The distance to a road? 2 cigarettes, said the old man who sat webbing his net. Now the road cuts down from the cliffs above. I've been back, bought wine from the old man's son who keeps his car parked in an olive shade. It's better, of course, that one can come and go. One needn't stare a lifetime at hot cliffs, thinking them impassable, except to goats and men whose speech and features grew like thorns. The old man's dead. The friends I traveled with are long since out of touch, and I'll admit I've lost much of a young man's nimbleness. I call these passing years agnostos topos, unknown country, a place of panting lizards. Yet how like home it seemed when I walked down out of the unfenced hills, thirsty, footsore, with words of greeting for the fishermen. This is a passage from near the end of the book. That year, my last full day in the village was spent at Kalamitsi with Patty and Joan. She had had another fall and had seriously cut her head and lost a lot of blood. Patty's hearing was bad enough that he was oblivious to her shouts, and the help were absent. Riza had gone round the bend when her only son declared that he wanted to join the priesthood, and she had quit. She was replaced by 2 younger, less experienced girls, one for days and one for evenings. A friend was staying with them, Miranda, who'd known Patty since childhood, and now found herself commanding the situation as temporary caretaker. She'd found Joan and stanched the wound and cleaned up the mess. When I arrived, Joan was reclining on the sofa. I bent to kiss her and could tell she was frailer, but this had no effect whatsoever on her sense of decorum. Do fix yourself an ouzo, David. Patty will be back with the mail any moment now. When Patty strode in with a young man's vigor, his good looks only slightly caved in by age or overgrown by his chubby brows, we took our drinks outside with a tray of mezes. The faintest breeze ruffled the leaves in the ilex trees and nudged the cypresses full of singing birds. I conveyed greetings from Kyrie Andreas, and that took Patty back to one of his happiest summers. Miranda joined us, having walked back from the village while Patty drove Dapple Gray, that's his car. She'd once been married to an Algerian revolutionary with whom she had a daughter. He was assassinated in 1964, and there was something horrible about how she had to go out and find his body in a charnel pit. I'm bipolar, you know, she announced at one point. Manic depressive. I can't help thinking this way, and besides that, I've been drinking all day. When she'd run off to check on something in the kitchen, I remarked to Joan that I'd only seen Miranda's manic side. Yes, said Joan dryly, so have we. We're rather worried about the other half. Growing up, Miranda had several stepfathers, among them Rex Warner, the poet and translator, and the great Greek painter Nikos Gikas, whom she adored. It seemed to be one of those slightly batty English circles with plenty of ambiguous sexuality. As a girl, she was introduced to another writer I admired. Him, I said, slapping my forehead. His memoir of childhood in England had once been a favorite book of mine. None other. He seduced me. I mean, I was willing, but I was a girl, I was ugly, and he took advantage of me. Oh, no. Another icon of innocence shot full of holes. This came out when we had returned to the Hayati while Patty and Joan napped. Miranda was jazzed, as the children would say. She was energized. While I excused myself for a quick lie down, she dashed off to help in the kitchen. I must have slept for an hour or so. I woke with Paddy leaning over me as he jostled my arm. Dave, I say, do you fancy a walk? Of course, I said, unsure how I'd been beamed to this particular place and time. I'd love to. He grabbed us a couple of hats and sticks, and we stepped down the path outside the wall to where Dapple Gray awaited us in the shade. I'm sure Paddy was a splendid driver when he was young, but at 87, he sat behind the wheel like El Cid, tied to his horse. He drove with the gas pedal on the floor, though he never got out of second gear. As a result, the car screamed like a banshee as he jerked it around bends in the road. On the ridge above Petrovuni, he pulled off the track through the olive trees. We did not walk far, perhaps 20 minutes, Paddy keeping time with his walking stick like a Whitehall barrister. He glanced at his watch frequently, as if keeping strict account according to doctor's orders. Still, think of it. 87, and able to get about like that. Even at a fraction of the physical specimen he once was, Paddy was utterly admirable. Assuming I lived so long, I would be drifting into la-la land before I was 80, with someone wiping my bum and feeding me through a straw. God of the shrug, give me time. Farmers had recently burned slash from the olive trees, and at the end of our walk, my trousers were striped and smeared with ash that clung to the scrub. The heat of early summer radiated from the grass and wild sage. It was almost time for the cicadas to start their whirring. For now, utter stillness, hardly a breath of wind, the crunch of dry vegetation underfoot amplified by my hearing aids. "A swim will feel good after this," Paddy said. "Are you game?" Of course. He whipped Dapple Gray down the mountain road, found me an extra pair of trunks in his room, and sent me off ahead of him to the sea. The water was calm, buoyant with salt. Wading in from their gravel beach, I swam out around the rocks to the point where I used to dive in the old days, and there I treaded water for some time, looking ashore as if I expected to see someone I knew stepping down the slope. We had picked capers from a bush there, Wolfie and Izzy and Jonna and I, 20-odd years ago. By the time I swam back, Paddy had made his way down the stone staircase to the beach. He carefully entered the water, balanced by a walking stick in his left hand, a huge boulder at his right. When he'd gone deep enough, he cast the stick aside and gave himself to the sea. I watched him swim for perhaps 20 minutes, and when he emerged, we rested briefly on the stony shingle. I could see the pacemaker's little mound at his clavicle, and in his left bicep, a magnificent old tattoo of the naked Gorgona, the mermaid who, according to one tradition, was sister to Alexander the Great. When I complimented him on it, he told me how George Seferis, great Greek poet, had loved the Gorgona. If a fisherman caught one, the story went, she would ask, "Pouine o Megalexandros," where is Alexander the Great? And the fisherman would answer to save his life, "O Megalexandros zi ke Vasilevi." Alexander the Great lives and reigns. It was the ultimate parable of modern Greek identity. I'll skip ahead a little bit. Paddy had changed to a white shirt and looked refreshed by the swim and the walk. "Nothing better," he said about it. He was in great spirits, bothered only by a blackbird that kept singing away in the tree behind his good ear, so he couldn't follow all of the conversation. I'd earlier shown him my own hearing aids that could be adjusted with a little pad of buttons I carried around. I wore the same smoke-stained clothes, but no one seemed bothered. Joan joined us for a while and then excused herself to lie down, accepting help from Miranda. This is how they'll do it, I thought. The childless couple. They have friends, people who love them and would never want to see them in a home. They would keep their dignity and grace for as long as possible. "Paddy's a young soul," Miranda had told me. "Joan's an old soul. She always has been." The description was perfect. With her long, angular frame in a caftan, Joan moved slowly through that house. She was older than Paddy, literally and figuratively. She was wise, always reading, always listening, rarely putting herself at the center of things. She was as beautiful as any human being I had ever known. Paddy, the obvious matinee idol, dashing and talented, would be anybody's pick for a friend. How lucky he was to have found Joan as a companion in good years and bad. That day, I'd tried to say to Paddy what I felt about his work, how important it was, how important to me he had been. I couldn't know whether I would ever see them again. Perhaps he sensed how much it meant to me to spend those hours with him, and when the other guests were gone, he insisted I stay to dinner. Paddy, Miranda, and I sat at the table in the living room, one lamp between us, eating fried eggs and potatoes and drinking more wine. Miranda gave him orders, taking care of him as a daughter might, and he recalled fondly how he'd first met her when she was a little girl. There was something about it he was trying to remember. A mouse. Yes, a mouse had died, and this wee girl was performing a funeral for it, a ritual burial. "But it wasn't just that," said Miranda. "I felt guilty. You see, I've only just remembered. I killed that mouse." "No," Paddy said. "It died on its own in a field." "I killed it," she said, "or I think I did." What do you mean you think you did? If you killed it, you'd remember. But I don't. I don't remember. It's something I repressed. It's only now coming back to me. Nonsense. What? I said nonsense. But it's true, Patty. You're so innocent you don't believe I could have done it. But I did, or think I did. You can't kill a thing and not remember it. Are you sure? Of course I am. Absolutely sure. If you kill a living creature, something with life, you do not forget. You never forget. How do you know? What do you mean, how do I know? I don't want to talk about it. Have you killed? In the lamplight, Patty looked shaken. Yes, I have. Have you killed people? You mean in the war? Oh, don't let's talk about it. It's too terrible. But we should talk about it, said Miranda, as a nurse might to a small boy. It's good to talk about it. I'm just remembering something I did as a child and suppressed. You can't mean what you say. But I do mean what I say, Patty. The world is like that, and I'm part of the world. I can't deny it. She turned to me. What did T.S. Eliot say? Mankind can't bear too much reality? Yes, I answered, no longer at ease in our small circle of light. Patty's hands moved, agitated, in front of his face. We had all had a lot to drink. Miranda was firm with him, out of caring, I could see, but at the same time I thought, oh, leave him alone. He has borne his share of reality. Let him be. It was late. I fretted about Marraketti, wondering what had happened to me, and since I didn't have the phone number of her house, I said I would go. Patty became very, very worried about my safety, walking the paths in the dark. He suggested I stay the night, but as is too often the case with me, I felt I had to press on, keep going, meet my obligations. Give me time. With her habitual practicality and way of taking care of people, Miranda volunteered to escort me to the road with a torch that she could bring back to the house. It was agreed, but I did not want to say goodbye. I never knew when I would be back, whether I would ever see them again. Patty meant the world to me, not as a monument, but as a friend who taught by example, a love of life. I tried not to be grim about going. Before we left, I knocked on Joan's door to say goodbye. She reclined on her bed with a reading light on, the volume of Yeats sprawled open beside her. Again, she apologized for her age, her frailty, and again I tried to convey that I was simply in awe of the way she carried on. You're heroic, I said. You're sure you won't stay? Patty asked as we shook hands at the door. I worry about you falling off a cliff out there. It's very dark, you know. He was right. A haze obscured the stars, and the moon had not risen. With 2 torches, Miranda and I could just find our way up the path and through the lighted yard of Poñeres' new hotel. When we had said goodbye and embraced at the edge of the road, I told her how happy I was to know that such friends were looking after Patty and Joan. It's what we have to do, she said. The alternative is unthinkable. When I was back on the road, the only sound, the slap of my sandals on pavement, past the older hotel on the hill, past the lane to Friend and Margarita's house where Lisa and the children slept, past Stratis the Mariner's to the gate for Marraketti's courtyard. The lights were out, but Spacek had removed the front door from its hinges to work on the wood, so I walked into the quiet house where my friends slept, an open house in more ways than one. Thank you very much.